Imagine a flicker. Not just any flicker, not a dying star, but a spark deep inside a machine that's been silent for ages, like an ancient giant just beginning to stir. This isn't happening in some high-tech lab, but on a desolate moon, way out on the forgotten edges of human space. Down there, a handful of miners, probably way too bored for their own good, make a choice. Maybe they were just looking for a thrill, something to break the endless monotony. What they found, what they unleashed, was a firestorm that would swallow the entire galaxy. This is the story of how one reckless gamble, a single thoughtless act, didn't just switch on an old spaceship, it accidentally lit the fuse for a galaxy war, like knocking over the first domino in a line that stretches across the cosmos. Kerberos Prime. Even the name felt like a cruel joke to the folks stuck on its surface. It wasn't a planet, not even a respectable moon, more like a jagged piece of rock orbiting a dim, uncaring star, right on the galaxy's doorstep, the cosmic equivalent of a forgotten attic. The sky? A never-ending twilight, pricked by the cold light of unfamiliar stars. For the few hundred souls at the Terran Colonial Authority mining outpost Epsilon 7, Kerberos Prime wasn't home, it was a prison sentence. They were a mixed bunch, old-hand rock borers, engineers who'd seen better days, and fresh-faced recruits chasing danger pay. All of them were stuck in the same grind, chowing down on rationed protein paste and breathing recycled air, with only the growl of mining lasers and the hiss of the air system to break the eerie silence of space. Days just melted into weeks, and weeks into months. If there was ever any thrill of being pioneers, it had long worn off, leaving behind a gritty sort of cynicism. These miners were the forgotten grunts of humanity's slow crawl out to the stars, their lives just a tiny, overlooked footnote in the grand saga of interstellar expansion. Official rules? Out here, those were more like gentle suggestions than ironclad laws. On Kerberos Prime, it was all about getting the job done and surviving the soul-crushing quiet. Then, during a routine deep-core survey, way out beyond the usual dig sites in a sector everyone thought was just boring rock, everything changed. They picked up a seismic blip. At first, they figured it was a sensor glitch, but it wouldn't go away. Elias Thorne, a veteran miner with more dust in his lungs than patience for red tape, talked his younger, more impulsive partner, Lena Hansen, and a skeptical, but equally bored, geologist, Dr. Aries Thorne, no relation, which was a running gag, into checking it out. Their beat-up ground-penetrating radar, usually busy sniffing out ore, painted an impossible picture beneath the ice and rock, a structure. Something huge, undeniably artificial, and completely alien, like finding a skyscraper buried under your backyard. Getting to it was slow, careful work, and totally off the record. Using modified plasma cutters and seismic charges, pretty primitive stuff, like using stone tools to open a bank vault, they chipped away at the frozen ground. What they uncovered wasn't a building, or any kind of ruin they recognized. It was a ship. A warship. Its hull, a smooth, black, unknown alloy, just seemed to drink the light from their flood lamps. It radiated an aura of incredible age and sleeping power. It was massive, a mountain of alien engineering half buried in the dirt, scarred by impacts from battles fought when humans were still figuring out sharp rocks. No markings they could read, no obvious way in, just this overwhelming presence of something utterly beyond them. First came the fear, that primal instinct screaming about unknown dangers. But on Kerberos Prime, fear and a kind of reckless curiosity were practically neighbors. So, they spent weeks studying it in secret. they roped in a few more trusted folks from Epsilon 7, Jax, the ex-military tech with a past he kept quiet, and Myra, the comms officer who could practically coax a signal out of a rock. Their understanding of the ship? Hilariously basic. They were like ants crawling on a supercomputer, impressed by the shiny case but utterly clueless about the complex circuits buzzing inside. Still, they couldn't resist. This was it. The discovery of a lifetime. Maybe a ticket off this godforsaken rock. Or something much, much bigger. The decision, when it finally happened, wasn't malicious. It was born from a profound, galaxy-altering ignorance mixed with that classic spark of human what if. What if we could get it to work? Lena wondered aloud, her voice echoing a bit in the tunnel they dug to the ship's side. Once said, the idea stuck. They were miners, engineers. Making things work was what they did, even if the thing was a colossal alien warship. They thought they knew the risks. They knew this was against every rule in the TCA handbook. But the ship, it was like it called to them, a silent siren song of incredible power and untold secrets. Their clumsy attempts to interface with its systems, bypassing layers of alien security they didn't even know were there, led to a moment of pure, dumb luck. Jax, by rerouting power from their own fusion generator through a cobbled-together connection, imagine trying to jump-start a battleship with a couple of AA batteries, managed to jolt a peripheral system. A low hum vibrated through the ancient hull, a thrum of power they felt in their bones. Lights flickered deep inside the ship, patterns of alien script danced across consoles that had been dark for millennia. They'd done it. They'd poked the sleeping giant. That first hum was subtle, a deep thrumming that vibrated more in their bones than their ears. It was the sound of a giant waking up after an eon-long nap. On the makeshift bridge they'd found their way into, a huge, cathedral-like space with holographic emitters and weirdly shaped consoles, alien symbols began to glow with an eerie light. Power indicators, cycling through colors humans didn't even have names for, pulsed faster and faster. The miners, a mix of total awe and sheer terror, just watched as the derelict warship, system by system, came back to life. What they didn't get, in their moment of reckless triumph, was how the ship was waking up. It wasn't just powering on its own lights. Activating its core systems hadn't just brought the ship online, it had triggered a whole bunch of dormant protocols. And the main one? A galaxy-spanning alert system. This wasn't some weak distress call from a broken-down ship, oh no. This was way more powerful, way more complex. It was a declaration. A resurrection. A signal designed not just to be heard, but to be felt by anyone who knew its signature, like ringing a colossal bell whose chimes could be heard in every corner of the galaxy. Across unimaginable distances, deep in the heart of massive interstellar empires and hidden alien communities, ancient receivers, silent for ages, flickered to life. The signal, a complex burst of hyperwave radiation, rippled through space-time itself. It was a multi-layered message. The main pulse was a blunt announcement, "She lives." Buried inside that were identifiers, threat assessments and, most importantly, coordinates, pointing right at that insignificant speck of dust called Kerberos Prime. First to react were the Sentinels of the Galactic Concord, a shaky alliance of older races who liked to think they kept the peace across the known galaxy. Their central archives, run by a synthetic race called the Silentium, matched the energy signature almost instantly. Panic shot through their normally calm diplomatic channels, like finding out a supposedly extinct supervolcano was about to erupt. The signal belonged to a Harbinger-class warship, a type linked to a species that had vanished tens of thousands of years ago, a species whose final, devastating war had reshaped entire sectors and left behind legends of planet-destroying weapons. The implications were huge. Who had turned it back on? And why? Then came the whispers from the shadows, from powers that didn't really care about the Concorde's rules. The Cathar hegemony, a militaristic empire of reptilian warriors, had myths about a great betrayal by the creators of these Harbinger ships. When they picked up the signal, their war leaders didn't see a mystery to solve. They saw an ancient enemy returned or, even worse, their terrifying tech in new, unknown hands. It was like seeing the ghost of a long-dead nemesis suddenly appear, armed and dangerous. Their fleets, always ready for a fight, started to move. Their commanders saw the signal as a clear reason to go to war, a challenge written in the stars. Even further out, in the dark voids between galaxies, something stirred, the Void Weavers. An enigmatic, sort of ghostly species, they were the stuff of nightmares for many Concorde races, more legend than fact. They were the ancient enemies of the Harbinger's creators. For them, the signal was like blood in the water for sharks, pulling their consciousness from whatever empty space they haunted. The ship wasn't just a weapon to them, it was a key, a relic from a war they believed wasn't over. Its reappearance was a chance to grab lost power and settle grudges that had been festering for millennia. Back on Kerberos Prime, the miners had no clue about the galactic storm they just kicked off. They only saw the amazing, terrifying revival of the alien ship. Its systems, now fully online, started to connect with their crude hookups in weird ways, projecting star charts of unknown regions onto their scavenged monitors, even translating basic status reports into a broken mix of human languages it had picked up from intercepted broadcasts over centuries. They were like kids who'd found a loaded gun, marveling at its shiny exterior, totally unaware of the devastation it was designed for. Myra, the comms officer, was the first to catch on. She noticed a sudden spike in background radiation, encrypted signals bouncing off local relays, signals that were definitely not human. "Guys," she said, her voice tight with a dawning horror, I think we've got company coming. A lot of company." It was like hearing the distant sirens, realizing they were heading straight for your house. The first reports reaching the Galactic Concorde were chaotic. A Harbinger-class vessel, back online in an uncharted system on the edge of Terran space. Humanity, up until now, had been a minor species, barely a blip on Concorde reports, technologically young, like toddlers in the galactic nursery, always squabbling amongst themselves, and stuck in a relatively small corner of space. The idea that they could be behind reactivating such a legendary and feared ship. It seemed ridiculous to many. Some Concorde analysts guessed it was a setup, that some hidden power was using the humans. Others, more panicky, suggested humans had stumbled onto something they couldn't control and had, in their ignorance, painted a giant target on their entire species. Diplomatic channels, usually slower than a sleepy snail, went into overdrive. The Cathar ambassador to the Concorde delivered a blistering ultimatum: stay out of it, or be seen as helping this new threat. Representatives of species whose worlds had been wrecked in the ancient Harbinger Wars demanded immediate, decisive action, destroy the ship, and quarantine, or even wipe out, the system responsible. Misinformation spread like a virus. Some claimed humans had deliberately resurrected the ancient war machine to show how aggressive they were. Others whispered that humanity had been chosen, that they were the new owners of the Harbinger's terrible legacy. The warship itself became a beacon in the void, a symbol. To the scared, it was the return of a forgotten nightmare. To the aggressive, a prize to grab or a rival to crush. To the opportunistic, a chance to shake up the galactic balance of power, like a legendary sword suddenly rediscovered, some wanting to wield it, some to destroy it, and others to simply watch the ensuing chaos. The miners on Kerberos Prime, their initial thrill now a sickening knot in their stomachs, were no longer just discoverers. They were the culprits. They were the fuse. Spy missions launched almost immediately. Concord scout ships, Cathar Recon patrols, and even sneakier vessels from unknown factions started heading for the Kerberos system, their sensors hungry for info. Sabotage was on the table. Some factions debated trying to snatch the ship, others wanted to destroy it remotely before its full power could be understood or used by its new, primitive masters. Humanity, blissfully unaware of the tangled web of ancient grudges and galactic power plays they'd stumbled into, found itself at the very center of a brewing interstellar crisis. Their reckless curiosity hadn't just poked a sleeping giant, it had rung the dinner bell for predators they didn't even know existed, and at the same time, painted them as the biggest threat to galactic stability in 10,000 years. The alerts, the accusations, the mobilization orders, they were the first distant rumbles of thunder, signaling a storm of unimaginable size. And humanity, isolated and unprepared, was standing right in its path. The speed of the galaxy's reaction was, for the isolated humans on Kerberos Prime, and soon for Earth itself, just bewildering. Within hours of Myra's panicked warning, the space around their desolate moon started to fill up. Not with friendly faces, or even cautious investigators, but with warships. It was like accidentally tripping a silent alarm that summoned not just the police, but every SWAT team and military unit from neighboring countries. Sleek, hungry-looking Cathar destroyers, their hulls practically vibrating with aggression, formed a menacing blockade. Further out, a more varied, but no less scary, collection of ships from a hastily thrown-together Galactic Concord task force kept a tense watch, their intentions totally unclear. And in the distorted space-time just out of sight, sensors hinted at other, more unsettling presences, the signature ripples of Void Weaver craft, phasing in and out of reality like cosmic glitches. The miners, trapped on the now fully awakened alien dreadnought, which they'd naively nicknamed the Wanderer before they realized the true mess they were in, were completely out of their league. It was like a group of kids had hotwired a tank and found themselves in the middle of a battlefield. The ship's systems, while partially responding to their clumsy commands, were also running on ancient protocols. Its defensive systems flared to life as alien vessels got closer. Elias Thorne's attempts to broadcast a message of peace, to explain it was all an accident, were either ignored or jammed, like trying to shout apologies during a cannon barrage. The Cathar, especially, seemed to take any transmission from the Harbinger-class vessel as a threat or a trick. Their communication channels, when they briefly opened, were filled with harsh, guttural demands for unconditional surrender and the immediate shutdown of the abomination. Humanity, as a species, was caught completely flat-footed. The Terran colonial authority, the folks in charge of Earth and its small colonies, initially blew off the frantic, garbled messages from Epsilon 7 as equipment failure or mass panic, like a parent dismissing a child's monster-under-the-bed story, until the monster actually crawls out. When the first solid sensor readings from deep space patrols confirmed multiple, unidentified alien fleets closing in on Kerberos Prime, disbelief turned to shock, then to a dawning, species-wide terror. Humanity was a pretty young spacefaring race. Our best warships were like toy boats compared to the alien battlecruisers now lined up in judgment. We had no seat at the galactic table, no ambassadors to the Concord, no treaties with the Cathar. We were, basically, cosmic nobodies who had just crashed the most exclusive and dangerous party in the galaxy, holding what everyone else thought was a doomsday device. The Galactic Concord, a sprawling and often clumsy alliance of hundreds of species, was thrown into chaos. Emergency sessions were called. Hawkish factions, led by species whose histories were scarred by the original Harbinger Wars, demanded the immediate and total annihilation of Kerberos Prime and any humans there. They argued that humanity, by showing they could, intentionally or not, reactivate such a weapon, had proven itself an existential threat. The risk of that technology falling into their hands, or being copied, was just too great. "They're like children playing with a stellar core," someone probably yelled. "Their recklessness has endangered us all. They must be cauterized." It was like a neighborhood watch deciding a new family was too dangerous because their kid found a bazooka. More moderate voices within the Concord, fewer and quieter, urged caution. They pointed out the lack of clear intent, the possibility of a huge misunderstanding. Maybe humanity was a victim, not an aggressor. They suggested sending a heavily armed diplomatic mission to investigate, to communicate, to contain. But their pleas for calm were drowned out by the rising wave of fear and anger. The sheer power signature of the reactivated Harbinger, a legend whispered for millennia, was enough to sway anyone on the fence. Propaganda, fueled by groups like the Cathar, painted humans as reckless savages, or worse, as cunning villains who had somehow mastered ancient, forbidden arts, a galactic smear campaign painting us as the universe's unruly teenagers. Pictures, often faked or taken out of context, of human conflicts and environmental damage on Earth were passed around as proof of our inherently destructive nature. The warship itself became the ultimate cosmic Rorschach test. For the Cathar, it was the ghost of their most hated enemy. Bringing it back to life was an unforgivable sin and a direct threat to their hegemony. For the Void Weavers, its awakening was a prophecy coming true, a chance to reclaim technologies they thought were theirs, or to make sure it was finally destroyed before their ancient prey's inheritors could use it. For many neutral species, it was just a terrifying wildcard, promising only chaos and conflict. The competing stories were stark. Were these humans chosen inheritors, or just galactic vandals who'd pried open Pandora's box? Things on Kerberos Prime went south, fast. A Cathar scout ship, trying to get a close-up scan of the Wanderer, got too close to its reactivated defensive perimeter. Automated point defense systems, ancient and terrifyingly efficient, like a hyper-advanced, sleeping watchdog, lashed out with bolts of pure energy, vaporizing the Cathar vessel in an instant. No warnings, no challenges. Just swift, brutal destruction. To the Cathar fleet, this was an unprovoked act of war, proof of their darkest fears. Their commander, a tough old veteran named Groknar, who'd built his career on stories of Cathar resilience against ancient foes, didn't need any more convincing. He gave the order to engage. The first real shots of the new galactic war weren't fired by human hands, but they were definitely because of human actions. Cathar disruptor cannons unleashed floods of incandescent energy at the Wanderer. The ancient ship's shields, flickering to life after thousands of years, absorbed the first hits, the impact sending shudders through its massive frame that threw the terrified miners to the deck. The ship's automated systems fired back, its main batteries, designed to fight threats on a planetary scale, returning fire with devastating results. Two Cathar cruisers, caught in the response, erupted into silent, expanding fireballs. That exchange, short and brutal, was the point of no return. It was broadcast across all Concorde channels, presented by the Cathar as definitive proof of humanity's aggression and the Harbinger's deadly power, becoming the galactic equivalent of the shot heard round the world, only this time, it was a death ray. The debate within the Concorde was over. A resolution passed, branding humanity a priority Omega threat. It wasn't a declaration of war in the usual sense, it was more like a galactic pest control order. The official line was containment and disarmament, but for many, including the Cathar and other vengeful factions, it was a green light for extermination. Humanity, through the terrified, fragmented reports from the miners still alive on the Wanderer, and the sudden, hostile attitude of every alien ship nearby, began to grasp the horrifying truth. They weren't just discoverers, they were the designated enemy. Their isolated act of curiosity on a forgotten moon hadn't just woken up an old ship, it had awakened ancient hatreds, destabilized galactic powers, and painted a bright, unmissable target on the back of their entire species. The galaxy wasn't just responding, it was converging, with humanity and their accidentally acquired alien dreadnought at the center of a rapidly expanding storm of violence and fear. The universe, it turned out, did not suffer fools gladly, especially fools who stumbled upon its most dangerous toys. The battle for Kerberos Prime? That was just the warm-up act, a tiny spark compared to the inferno about to sweep the galaxy. The Wanderer vaporizing Cathar cruisers, amplified by furious hegemony propaganda, was the final straw. For the Cathar, it was about honor and survival. For the awakened Void Weavers, it was the call to a war they'd been expecting for ages. For many in the Galactic Concorde, it was a regrettable but necessary step to neutralize a clear and present danger. The complex web of treaties, non-aggression pacts, and delicate power balances that had kept a sort of peace across the galaxy, imagine a carefully constructed house of cards, started to unravel with terrifying speed. Humanity, a species that had only just figured out limited interstellar travel, was suddenly thrown onto the main stage of a conflict so vast and brutal it was beyond our worst nightmares. It was like a sandlot baseball team being forced to play in the World Series against battle-hardened giants. Our scattered colonies, from tiny farming outposts to more established research stations, were now on the front lines. Earth, our home world, became a primary target not just because it was strategically important, but because of what it symbolized. To cripple humanity, to break our will, the ancient powers figured, you strike at the heart. The opening shots of the wider war were fast and devastating. Cathar battle fleets, already on the move, surged into poorly defended human systems like a relentless tide, their warships light years ahead of Terran defenders in terms of power. Outposts went dark, their desperate distress calls cut short. Void Weaver attacks were sneakier, their ghostly ships bypassed conventional defenses, hitting infrastructure, spreading terror, and leaving behind ruined worlds haunted by whispers and shadows. They were like phantoms slipping through walls to wreak havoc. Even parts of the Galactic Concorde, pressure to enforce that priority Omega threat resolution, set up strict no-fly zones around human territories, effectively blockading us and treating any Terran ship as hostile. The miners aboard the Wanderer, Thorn, Hansen, Jax, Myra, and the few others who'd survived the first Cathar attack, were in an impossible spot. They were fugitives, outcasts, yet they controlled one of the most powerful weapons in the galaxy. The ship's ancient systems, though not fully understood, responded to their desperate attempts to fight back, to survive. The Wanderer became a ghost, a legend whispered in fear and awe. It would appear in besieged human systems to drive off attackers, only to vanish before overwhelming enemy forces could trap it. But it was one ship against countless enemies. Its victories were like pinpricks of light in an overwhelming darkness, acts of defiance, not a strategy that could actually turn the tide. The guilt of what they'd done weighed heavily on the surviving miners. Every life lost, every world burned, was a direct result of their reckless curiosity. Back on Earth, it was panic and chaos. The Terran Colonial Authority government, a bureaucracy built for peacetime, just shattered under the pressure, like a glass statue hit by a wrecking ball. Military leaders, facing an enemy with vastly superior technology and numbers, started implementing desperate plans. Project Stronghold was born, a plan to fortify key systems, abandon colonies they couldn't hold, and try to reverse engineer any alien tech they could salvage from early battles, including fragmented data from the Wanderer. But it was too little, too late. Humanity was playing a desperate game of catch-up where survival itself was the prize. The war was fought on many fronts. There were conventional fleet battles, where human ships, using desperate tactics and sheer grit, were often outmatched but made the enemy pay dearly for every inch, like terriers snapping at the heels of wolves. The Cathar fought with brutal efficiency, their tactics sharpened by centuries of war. The Concord forces, a mixed bag of different species with varying levels of enthusiasm, were less predictable. Some just wanted to contain the problem, others tried to use the chaos to their own advantage. The Void Weavers were a whole different kind of nightmare. Their warfare was as much psychological as physical. Their ability to phase in and out, to mess with perception, made them almost impossible to fight head-on. The galaxy itself became an incredibly complex chessboard, where every move could trigger a cascade of unforeseen consequences. Ancient rivalries, long buried under the Concord's peace, flared up again. Species that had been annoyed by Cathar dominance saw a chance to side with the struggling humans, not because they liked us, but for their own strategic reasons, like betting on an underdog in a high-stakes game. Other, more reclusive powers, who had watched empires rise and fall for millennia, began to stir, their motives a complete mystery. The war, sparked by humanity's accidental blunder, quickly grew, pulling in factions that initially couldn't have cared less about humans, but cared a lot about the shifting balance of power and the reappearance of Harbinger-level tech. It was like a small kitchen fire that rapidly spread to engulf the entire neighborhood. Propaganda and misinformation became powerful weapons. The Cathar painted humanity as naturally barbaric, a plague species that had deliberately unleashed the Harbinger's curse. Some Concord news feeds portrayed humans as tragic victims, pawns in a bigger game, while others just echoed the Cathar story. Humanity's own attempts to broadcast our side of things, to explain that the Wanderer's activation was an accident, were mostly dismissed as the desperate lies of a cornered enemy. We were branded as the sparkers, the ones who lit the galactic firestorm. The sheer scale of the conflict was mind-boggling. Front lines stretched across dozens of light-years. Imagine trying to defend an entire continent with only a handful of soldiers. Worlds that had known peace for generations became battlegrounds. Ancient technologies, relics of wars fought when the galaxy was young, were dusted off and brought into play. The Wanderer, with its human crew, became a powerful symbol for both sides. To humanity, it was a sliver of hope, a testament to our accidental power, a weapon that could, maybe, buy us time. To our enemies, it was the ultimate prize, the ultimate threat, the very reason the war had to be fought to its bitter end. Humanity, unprepared and outmatched, was forced to adapt at a brutal pace, learning to swim in a tidal wave of violence. New tactics were invented on the fly. Scientists worked frantically to understand the alien technologies we encountered, hoping for a breakthrough, any kind of edge. Soldiers, many of whom had never seen combat, were thrown into desperate defensive actions, fighting for their homes, their families, their very right to exist in a galaxy that had suddenly, violently, decided we were a menace. The initial shock gave way to a grim determination. If we were going to be branded galactic pariahs, if we were going to be hunted, then we would fight with the ferocity of a species with nothing left to lose. That single act of reactivating a derelict ship had done more than trigger an alert. It had fractured the galaxy. It had awakened slumbering giants, reopened ancient wounds, and plunged countless worlds into a war of unimaginable scale and ferocity. For humanity, the age of blissful ignorance was over. Our introduction to the galactic community wasn't peaceful contact, it was fire and blood. The universe was vast, ancient, and filled with powers beyond our understanding, and we had just accidentally declared war on all of them. The galaxy was now a crucible, and humanity was trapped in its searing heat, our future an uncertain ember in a galaxy-wide conflagration. The war had just begun, and its end was nowhere in sight. So, the galaxy is at war, and humanity, the accidental spark, is fighting for its life. What do you think happens next? Can the crew of the Wanderer somehow clear humanity's name, or are we doomed to be the galaxy's most wanted? Will unlikely alliances pop up in all this chaos, or will those ancient grudges prove too strong to overcome? Drop your theories, your hopes, and your fears for mankind in the comments below. And hey, if you want to follow more stories from the edge of the unknown, to explore those what-ifs that make us rethink our place in the cosmos, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. You won't want to miss the next chapter in this saga.